All right, very excited to have Mark Baldino back on the podcast from Fuzzy Math. We were talking the other day about some topics that overlap for us, and it's all about legacy software and the pains and perils of dealing with it. I'm just curious for you, starting with kind of what's going on. What's the problems that people are facing? So maybe talk about what you think. What's the issue with having legacy software right now?
I think one of the bigger problems that people see is just the support and maintenance of these tools. And so we're on the design side and the user experience side, so I can kind of speak about that. But I know that there are severe technical pains with legacy software. But I think on the UX or customer experience side, the pain is in support, updates, integrations, onboarding. Legacy software very often doesn't take advantage of, I'll say, modern customer experience best practices and meeting kind of expectations. If you think of the flip, which we can get to later, of what does non-legacy software look like, I think onboarding and support it can kind of be the centerpiece of where you focus. Yeah. And I think a lot of legacy software isn't there right now.
Yeah, and when I talk to people about their legacy software issues, the issue always comes up. It's sort of like they're kind of a ticking time bomb, because at some point there just aren't going to be any COBOL developers left. I know, actually, I took it in college. I remember writing some stuff, and it has been long enough that I'm pretty sure I wouldn't recognize it again. But those people are diminishing. It's not like next year there's going to be more of them, and so I feel like a lot of companies are in a way, kind of a game of chicken, where they're saying, okay, well, this would cost a lot to do now, but can we live with these problems? And at some point, kind of kick the can to the next person or something like that. And I'm curious, if you've experienced that sort of hesitation about, well, moving forward is uncertain, so what do we do?
100%. I mean, legacy software tends to be really strong technically. Right. It has a really strong technical underpinning. And I think for a while in software, that worked, that ruled the day. And so those organizations that, employ the last 100 COBOL developers, in the United States or something like that, they have a vested interest in keeping that going and the safety and security that it provides. We worked with an EDM enterprise data management software vendor that had legacy software, and it had been running at their client's install for 15 years without having to restart. Yeah. So that's amazing. That's a reliability, that's a win, but they can't make changes to it. They can't extend it. They can't move it to meet where the market is. It only can represent where the market was maybe 15 years ago. And so they're kind of, I would say, scared to change, scared to embrace that change, which is understandable. But it really, as you said, it's game of chicken, or you're putting yourself in a box where you really can't.
It's funny. You bring up a really good point. I remember talking with an engineer, actually going back to college, in college, who had worked on phone systems, and the phones that, to date ourselves, that we grew up with, that had a cord, like the little windy cord that would get that weird knot in it that you couldn't undo. That those systems were designed to be so insanely triple redundant that it was really weird if the phones weren't working. That was like a huge, someone must have run over a telephone pole. Whereas now it's we have a whole ad campaign from a few years ago based on "Can you hear me now?" Because it's maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. It's a less of a thing now. And when I look at even legacy systems that we've worked on, in fact, there's one that we've worked on where I remember estimating what the cost to rebuild it would be, and they decided not to do that. And then 7 or 8 years later, they'd spent more to just whack-a-mole bugs for 6 or 7 years than they had that would have been just to redo it. And I think I've seen an article in CIO.com that was something like that. For these systems, you basically pay for it again every 5 years with whatever your stuff is. Right. It's crazy.
It sounds right. And all you're doing is keeping status quo, right? You're not growing and shifting, and you're eventually it's going to catch up with you, most likely from a competitive perspective.
Well,
someone's going to come along that's faster and and more adaptive to the market.
Yeah, and you tease some of the stuff that I think is really interesting. So to kind of get out of kind of what's wrong with legacy and onto what's possible and like why you might think about doing it, you tease some of the stuff. I know stuff we would come up with, like, you know, integrations, you know, customer service. But your onboarding one is really interesting. I'm curious, maybe start there and talk a little bit more about things you'd get out of, you know, why would you embark on something like that?
Well, I mean, let's say when we're talking to folks who have legacy software, and it can be like legacy tech, or it can be a SaaS-based solution that is legacy or hasn't been updated in a while. One of the choke points becomes customer onboarding and scaling. A lot of people build their software by incrementally adding features for the next big client. So you get an enterprise client comes through. Yeah. Hey, you check the boxes on these 10 things. We need you to add these 5 things. Right. We do that for 3 people and do it for smaller companies, and all of a sudden you have 1,000 check boxes. And literally adding a new customer becomes a chokehold on your business. And I know this in speaking to C-suites at SaaS-based software companies, which maybe tech stack-wise are a little bit more modern than you'd get a client install or a thick client or something like that, but they haven't taken the onboarding component and administration of the tool seriously, and they haven't thought about that as a product. Because the expectation is maybe not in enterprise world or B2B, I can sign up and get it going, right? It's not maybe that turnkey from the website. I can put in my credit card information and add my team and we're up and running. There must be some configuration. But basically, you have a bunch of technologists who are more or less modifying the database to enable one more customer. So that's a huge load from a human resources perspective. Yeah. Humans are pretty hard to scale. It slows everything down. And those systems, again, I'm not a developer, but I know the performance of those systems is always slower at the end of the day because you kind of have this garbled system of code that's really not built to scale.
And even speaking from the tech side, like my experience has been that the legacy systems were built to do whatever they were built to do and are often configurable, but in the sort of configure for any new customer or any big customer that you kind of just described, they can get clunky and maybe not do what you need them to do there. So there's kind of fix on top of fix on top of fix. And 20 or 30 years later, it's really difficult to move something because even if you think, just from like a, tech debt kind of point of view, you fix something and all of a sudden you're not, you have to go through the whole test suite and make sure you've covered all your bases to make sure you haven't broken something somewhere else, which almost certainly you have. And so that's sort of that's one of the risks for sure.
Yep. No, totally agree. And I think that when to move, what's the balance between flexibility for a customer perspective and stability for your platform is a difficult one, specifically for people that are starting up. But you start making those decisions and they influence your product roadmap for conceivably forever.
Well, so one of the things that I try to infuse in a lot of our other work that we do is only do something if there's an outcome in mind. So I think a lot of times, these digital transformation, modernization projects are done because just because we hate the COBOL system, or just because the new guy wants to do it in the new framework, whatever. And I find that you get better results and get people more aligned if we're modernizing for some new business objective. So to your point, if we're saying something like it's really hard to onboard new customers, and great, we just finished this new customer, but we have this Fortune company coming on board. It's going to cost us that much again and again and again. If we look at the onboarding costs as at least the first thing to build into the value, now we've got a goal we're going for. That seems to be a better way to approach it. I'm curious for you, how does that work on the UX side of things?
Yeah, well, we'd love to start with those sort of business goals, right? If we have this pain point and what it's actually costing the business, they can quantify that even better, and we can kind of work back to what does it mean from a change perspective? What is the current experience? How does it compare to best practices in the industry? So we do a lot of scorecards. So user experience, user interface and interaction, SaaS, we kind of do these scorecards and say, here's where you are and here's where you compare to best practices. And then we talk to their customers. For many of our clients, we are the first time that they're talking to their customers in a proactive way outside of sales and support. So they skip everything in the middle, that entire customer lifecycle journey. They don't talk to them. And I'd say 99% of them people don't have metrics inside of their software to say this is how somebody's using my software. So we're trying to fill in that knowledge gap by proactively, in a discovery fashion, talking to their customers and understanding how they do use the software, and not asking them, what do you want in the software? It's not that type of question. It's really, how are you using it, and where are some of the pain points, and what are some of your goals with the software? And that's where we can kind of reevaluate. Okay, let's say we're specifically talking about onboarding. We learn that there's 5 people involved in onboarding, and they all have different roles and titles, and they all work across the globe. And your tool, when you try to onboard a new client, has one client contact and no sense that there's multiple roles and responsibilities. Somebody who can hook up an API data connector to backend database is very different from somebody who can make a financial decision to purchase software. Is different to somebody who's going to set up the users or the products and services within. So it's really pulling apart the process, evaluating it, embedding some customer voice of the customer, and then saying, here's where you are, and here's kind of where you got to go, and this is the
so let me say, so let's say I'm the owner of a SaaS product, and for the sake of the story, I'm able to get access to this data. You spend all day in this. What are the kinds of data points and metrics that you would want to know about or look at to make that kind of decision?
We'd want 2 if you have the data. The first is a high level, like CSAT, customer satisfaction metric. That can be different. We'd want it across different types of customers and roles, but really an understanding of how successful are people with this software. There's ways you can do it, but think simple is a net promoter score. I'd refer to the software or not. So that's at the higher CSAT. The benefit of getting that type of data is that's pretty easily connectable to some revenue goals or some quarterly KPIs that business leaders are evaluating. But then we would want some actual analytics. So there's lots of good analytics around how people use a website, what pages they're using, and maybe what the conversion funnel is. There's not a lot of good data for inside of a tool. So what is the workflow that people are actually connecting with? What features are they going to first, second, third, and fourth to accomplish a core task? Where are they dropping out of those processes? So everyone's like funnel, conversion from a marketing and sales perspective. No one's thinking about a funnel and conversion of actually using a tool. And I don't think a lot of companies who purchase the SaaS software know how their team is using it and whether it's a real benefit. And people who own, if I'm a CEO of SaaS-based software, I don't think they have a good understanding of how it's being used by key clients and broken down by either demographic or some sort of market segments or profiles. And so it's that high-level CSAT, customer satisfaction, and then sort of usage metrics within the tool. Even if you gave me, these are the top 5 features that get used, that's invaluable. I don't think that's a heavy lift, but a lot of people don't have access or the tools to get.
Have you ever been really surprised by kind of one of those discovery sessions where you're like, oh wow, that's a really interesting finding about a metric or a usage or a pattern or something like that?
I mean, because we don't get a lot of that data, it can be a challenge. I think I'm more surprised that there's lack of data of who the customers are and kind of how they're utilizing it. So my surprise is more not, I heard there was something interesting. It's there's really, really successful businesses out there with, I think, what people consider good to great software. And it's kind of a little bit of a black box how people are using it and want to be using it. And some are more sophisticated than others. But I think I'm often surprised by, hey, we got to go get this data, or we don't have any way to collect that data. And then it's a matter of, okay, that's understandable. Let's go do some homework. Let's figure out how we can combine this stuff and tell a better story.
I'm really glad you called out the usage funnel, because we talk a lot about that too, where it's getting the customers to the product. Yes, that's a really important first step, but staying on the product and using it over time and increasing your lifetime value, all that kind of stuff. We can't help you if we don't know what's happening inside the app and where people are going, where they're getting stuck. I know for me, some of the things are sort of the surprising places people don't go. It's wow, this is a really cool part of the app. No one ever goes here. Why is that? Or places they get stuck, things like that. I always find those to be really interesting because then we can come back with ideas to make the product better, as opposed to saying, we delivered it and now here's your customers are kind of off on their own.
Yeah, there's still a lot of edge case development, and that happens a lot in legacy software. You talked about tech debt, right? Well, we can't exclude this, so we got to sort of build it, but we have no idea how many people are using it. But I do know that our one Fortune 100 client will not sign up for our software next year if we remove it. And that's a legitimate, real problem for business. I don't mean to understate it, but you probably don't have a good sense of how people are using that one feature and how many people are.
Yeah.
What are they using before and what are they using after? And what is it kind of getting them, from a process and workflow
I also find there's also sort of on the flip side, we've had clients that assume that something is being used, and that when you put in the analytics to find out, it's like, oh, no one cares about this at all. I know it seems really near and dear to you, but that was not part of what people care about. And knowing that helps you make decisions, because I think a lot of those investment decisions are based on kind of hearsay sometimes. We think this, we believe this, but we don't have any data to back it up. And there's even kind of a fear around going and getting it sometimes. So I'm curious for you, as you look at in a world where you've done a modernization and you kind of look back on what was accomplished, what changed for that company having done the work, what are some things that come to mind about why you do it? Because here's what we got on the outcome side.
I mean, the biggest outcome is going to be increases in some of those metrics, right? If we are improving customer satisfaction, like that's a pat everybody on the back. If we are moving metrics and KPIs that the C-suite cares about, that's really fantastic. If we're reducing churn, like those are all great. I think that a direct, but some people see it as an ancillary benefit, is that you're helping an organization be much more responsive to their customers, and really imbuing the voice of their customers in their product development life cycle. Because sometimes it's very absent from how people develop software. And so we call it being user-centered. You call it being customer-centered. It's really, instead of saying the technology is the center of this equation and we're going to build the greatest thing and we're going to give it to people. So you're thinking tech up, we're going to drive it down and give it to people. And because it's so powerful and we think it's so awesome and it checks a bunch of boxes during some procurement process, great. We really are advocating for the flip of that. And that's a real kind of light bulb moment for a lot of our clients who aren't spending time thinking about their end user customers. It's, okay, we're going to think about them and they're going to be the bottom of the pyramid and their needs are going to be here. And we're going to derive all of our product decisions based on that. So the biggest benefit I see is people feel more confident in the decisions they're making in their software. They're actually reflecting what the market and their customers need. And they feel like they're all marching in sort of the same direction, as opposed to, you mentioned whack-a-mole before, got these list of features or bugs and we're going to try to hit these in whatever order priority we can. No, step back from that. Talk to your customers, understand their journey, and understand pain points and goals. And let's reduce the pain points and let's amplify those goals or wins in your software, and really use that as the decision-making process for what you include or don't include in the software.
How successful are you at having that conversation with clients about like this approach, this strategy, even though maybe it seems flipped or something?
I think a lot of clients that come to us are ready for it. They don't know that that's what they need, but they'll describe, hey, our customer churn's really high, our lifetime customer value is decreasing, and we're not sure, but kind of got an inkling that the software is hard to use. Maybe an example I use is that if somebody's unwilling to put a screenshot of their software on their website, it probably means they have sort of a UI negligence problem. They've been negligent about UI and UX, but they don't really know how to go about it. And so a lot of people go straight to fix the UI, make this look prettier. And so some of our process can be, that's one component, but you're struggling to make consistent decisions that are aligned with your customer needs right now. And so we got to kind of change that process first. We have to put this foundation in place, and we all have to teach each other how to go about doing customer research, how to do rapid prototyping, how to get something out in front of the market and in an iterative fashion, and learn, and then put some foundational building blocks in place for better information architecture, navigation, and design. Then we get to the UI.
You said something I'd love to hear more about. You said, because we talked about, metrics inside the app, and that's like numbers that about usage and stuff like that. But then you said things that everybody has outside of the app, things like renewal rates are down. I don't like showing the app and demos. Like, what are some things that, no matter you have tracking in the app or not, what are some sort of leading indicators that maybe it's time to think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think churn, at least in SaaS software and folks that are modernizing platforms, is probably one of the biggest components. SaaS software in general, as I've studied it, has these sort of peaks and valleys of growth, and I think people get to these sort of peaks and they realize that things are slowing down, and that's just a revenue and stall out. So that's the kind of number of customers and acquisition. And then there's the retention and overall lifetime value. I mean, those are things we hear from the C-suite, whether they know why. That's sort of a component of when they would decide to make changes. The other is that there's this nagging sense that they're behind in the market. They are going through a sales process, procurement process. They're losing to people that they perceive to be technologically inferior and have a superior UX or usability. And so they don't really know how to fix that. They haven't invested probably in design or user experience, but they have this nagging sense that they're losing things because the software looks really hard to use. My hypothesis is it probably ends up being hard to use. So that's something they'll hear on kind of the front end from a sales perspective.
So one of the things I want to kind of maybe finish on is risk. And, from the technology side of things, I think one of the thing that comes to mind, the first thing people think about why not to do it is how risky it is from a cost and a development point of view. Are we risking downtime? Is it going to cost a lot of money and then we're not going to get anywhere? And the strategy that we employ, I learned recently, has a name. And so we've always called it a progressive rewrite. And the concept is instead of like trying these wholesale, like rewrite the whole thing from scratch ideas seem to fail pretty often. And the idea, if you were to wrap your old system in like a modern wrapper and then create this new kind of service architecture idea where, little calls are going to separate things, you could slowly but surely over the course of time isolate some kind of function and replace it with something new, and to the outside world and to the front end that maybe you guys would work on. It's still the same data, but maybe it's coming from different places. Right. And I learned that that's called the Strangler Fig approach, and from a client of ours, Peter Anderson. So shout out to Peter Anderson. It's a what's the guy's name? Is it Fowler? Derek? Not Derek Fowler. Someone will correct me in the comments. Who's the big software philosophy guru, came up with that idea. So strangler fig is a plant that slowly wraps its tendrils up a plant and tree and then takes it over and kills it. I think so. Maybe the killing side isn't the upside, but the idea that it takes over time is actually pretty interesting. So that's a strategy that we employ. I'm curious for you, does it in a way, maybe does it have to be a Band-Aid, or is there a different way to do a UX refresh?
No, I mean, there are these progressive approaches, and I think that's a great first step. So a lot of folks who are working with are in some sort of roll-up scenario, right? They maybe have been acquired by a PE firm that's rolling them up, and so there's a sense of how do we quickly integrate this from a brand and overall look and feel. And I think that can go a long way to integration, but when you get down to the core of the workflow, it's probably going to feel really, really different. So a lot of, to your point, a lot of clients can't just sort of pause and rebuild, and they can't start, they can't really start over. So we worked with a enterprise contingent labor company for 5 years where all we did was this approach of slow rebuild and rework of their usability. And they were patient and could do it, and they had the kind of market. I think some people need to move a little bit quicker. One thing we employ now a lot, because when people look at the user experience design process, I throw out the term research, and everyone's like, whoa. Like, well, how much time are you inserting into our process? We already have our quarterly planning process done. We know what's going to get released in Q2, 3, 4, 5. And that is a lot of fear of getting things done. And when a vendor comes in and says, slow down, great. I can try to make the case that, we've talked about, Mike, before. What's the cost of not doing this? What's the cost of delaying this 3 months? Can you help quantify that? And I know in both of our experience, the pain that they actually, if they can quantify it, the pain that they're experiencing probably tells them to move quicker. But one approach we've been doing a lot recently is this parallel path approach. So it's similar to yours that you mentioned, which is the kind of bits and pieces and eventually pull the whole thing underneath and be born again. But we try to work in parallel. So we'll make those incremental updates to the software. They can be UI fixes, usability fixes, and some key features. And then we're working on kind of a little bit more blue ocean or green field kind of environment where we're trying to take some key use cases and do more of a customer development approach and a user-centered approach where we're doing more rapid prototyping, low fidelity. And then what you kind of have an option when you get there. You can take those learnings from that parallel path and put it into the progressive. Or you can start to make a case of, hey, we need to have a big cutover, and now we can make the investment. Maybe what we do a lot is we're working on like the user what's the use case
Sure,
for this from
sure.
a usage perspective, and our client is working on the commercial business perspective. When we can marry those two up, we can say, okay, now we've vetted this idea enough that we know we can actually start
Yeah.
the new foundation and then eventually move some clients over. I think both win. I think very few businesses are like, we're going to sort of stop what we're doing for 6 months and rebuild this from scratch, because that generally means the business isn't probably being successful. And there's something to be said for people that want to keep their current customers happy and not lose them along the way.
That's fantastic. Hey, so this has been great. As I always hope for, I learned something, so thanks. And
same
thanks
to you.
again for being on the old podcast with me, and look forward to having you again sometime.
Anytime, Mike. Thank you for having me.
Hey, you made it all the way to the end. Thanks. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear more content just like this.